So my paper and presentation for this symposium are an abbreviated version of a chapter in a book that I'm working on predicaments of technological change in the digital era. And by now, and so my paper is about the spread of these problems specifically to the education sector. And the significance and the implications for how the training of minds loops back onto societal problems such as the pursuit of social justice, especially in the context of deepening socioeconomic polarization and entrenched inequalities. And my focus is on the United States. I intend my presentation to have global implications, but again, my focus is on the United States. This is where I live and work, and it's very much part of my positionality. So just to give you a sense of the kinds of issues that are in circulation on digital issues in the United States. Frank Pasquale's book, How Everyday Decisions from Judicial to Hiring, Firing, Credit Approval, Scheduling routinely discriminate based on race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, and their intersections without explanation, which is why it's called the black box society, the secret algorithms that control money and information. Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, shows how algorithmic governance perpetuates Jim Crow, legalized segregation in the United States, 1865 to 1968, in the digital era, in regimes of mundane practices. A common image of Jim Crow is a picture of a black person drinking out of one water fountain and a white person drinking out of another water fountain. Fast forward to the digital era, and the automated soap dispensers and faucets in public restrooms designed by white men do not recognize hands with more pigment on them than what you would find on a white person's hands, and so persons of color then don't get to wash their hands in public restrooms. Brian Jefferson's book, Digitize and Punish, Racial Criminalization in the Digital Age, shows how a system of digitalized punitive surveillance unjustly targets marginalized communities of color. Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, show how search engines embed racist and sexist values. And Virginia Eubanks's book, which I think you cited, Ryan, Automating Inequality, how high-tech tools profile, police, and punish the poor, shows how data mining, policy algorithms, predictive risk models unjustly target marginalized populations by class, race, ethnicity, gender, and so forth, and creates a digital poorhouse. So broadly then, my question is, how is it possible that society tolerates persistent applications of technologies with such destructive social effects? Now, one possible answer to that question might be, well, subjects are implicitly racist, sexist, and adhere to many isms. But that doesn't really explain individual actions that unintentionally contribute to racism, sexism, and so forth, such as the perhaps well-intentioned white men who had designed those automated soap dispensers and faucets in the public restrooms. So this is really a scale issue, how to connect unself-conscious micro-scale practices with macro-scale mentalities. And so my presentation today is not a case study, but rather I'm going to develop an argument based on drawing from several bodies of literature and a critical synthesis of the issues in digital-oriented literatures, critical data studies, digital humanities, digital geographies, also economic geography and innovation studies, and mainstream and critical education literature. So I argue that the digitalization of the education sector inculcates technocratic values, meaning that technical knowledges and skills are considered sufficient to tackle social and societal problems. This shapes subjects' knowledges narrowly, and so subjects then acquire technical skills, but they lack contextual and conceptual knowledges. By contextual knowledges, I refer to knowledges of the dynamics and power relations in a place and in places across space in relation to one another. And by conceptual knowledges, I refer to the values and the mentalities that drive thought and practices. And so let me just elaborate briefly by way of example. And my example is actually quite similar to an example that Joachim, is that correct pronunciation? Almost there, offered yesterday. And I very much appreciated your reference to the big data of non-existent data. But I wanted to call your attention just to the exercise of hotspotting, something that students in a geographic information class, or GIS, would learn, and something that GIS practitioners enact. And so hotspotting refers to the delineation of an area in which something is spatially concentrated. And commonly, that something that is spatially concentrated and that gets mapped is crime, and commonly, the kind of crime that gets represented is drug use. Well, if these GIS students and GIS practitioners don't have knowledges of the history of uneven development across a metropolitan area, then they probably wouldn't even know that they might be using inappropriate data, right? Because a map of crime data across a city and the unevenness of that crime data itself is a product of uneven surveillance, such that poor communities of color are heavily surveilled, and white middle-class communities where there's plenty of drug use are not surveilled at all. And that those GIS students and practitioners also, if they don't have conceptual knowledges to even begin to ask the question about the nature of the data relative to their question, relative to the task, and relative to societal issues, then that is, I would suggest, a serious problem. And I'm going to be explaining that there is a dominant mode of education in the United States right now, and has been for quite a while. And the focus is on technical skills and what it is that people can do, but not necessarily what they know in terms of, say, contextual or conceptual knowledges, which are considered relevant only if they are useful towards the completion of a particular task. And so this insulates subjects from thinking about the consequences of their actions. It relieves subjects of responsibilities as citizens. It cultivates a blind eye to injustices, and it helps explain societal tolerance. And so just to let you know where I'm going here, I'm going to start out talking about education in the digital era, and I'll spend most of my time on that. And then I'll talk a little bit about downstream consequences and work practices in what I'm broadly going to call in this presentation the data sciences, to refer to everything from coding and data analytics, visualization, data science, various approaches to AI, et cetera. And then I'll briefly wrap up in a conclusion. So the prevailing pedagogy in the United States, also elsewhere, but again my focus is the United States, has a name, although the name is not usually used because this pedagogy is so normalized. And so it's called competency-based education, or competency-based education and training. I'll use the acronym CBET because to recognize the strong vocational mission of the pedagogy, specifically to train students with skills that they can then bring to jobs. Okay, and so in the digital era, the new millennium, this pedagogy increasingly is delivered and mediated via the ed tech industry, which refers to an assemblage of apps, devices, software, hardware, platforms designed to datafy student knowledges. And datafication generally refers to the appropriation, quantification, examination, manipulation of data from people's digital footprints for profit. So when we all go online, we know that firms can scrape our data from our digital footprint for their use for profit. And the same thing now is happening within education. The selling point of this pedagogy is that it is personalized for student self-pacing, so that students who have a very good background in a subject can whiz through assignments as they please, and because they're working online. And those who don't have a background at all can take as long as they like. And in this regard, this pedagogy is associated with a liberal discourse and agenda to cater to a diverse student market. Whoops, what happened? Oh, there we go. Okay, and so the pedagogy then renders students entrepreneurs of their own education, reflecting the ripening of the neoliberalization of education as the teaching and learning mission is devolved from teachers to students. And on their part, teachers then become guides on the side. They become facilitators, in effect, of information. And the orientation of the pedagogy is towards predetermined expected learning outcomes, or ELOs. It's on performance, it's on technical skills. So in the United States, CBET exists in various forms in different types of institutions. In a pure CBET model, the personalization principle is unconstrained by the curricular structure of traditional colleges and universities, which give credit for seat time in the completion of courses towards a degree. In a pure CBET model, credit is given for mastery of ELOs, which then can be grouped into courses towards a certificate that students can earn in considerably less time than a college degree. And so there's a whole new business complex of education in the United States. So there's many new non-traditional universities, one of the first that are implementing this pure CBET model. One of the first was Western Governors University, which was founded just at the turn of the new millennium as a private online university implementing this pure CBET model. There are massive open online courses, or MOOCs, delivered through private universities to a global student market. And essentially famous professors from elite universities pre-record lectures, and then, of course, grading is automated. There are also massive open online course corporations, MOOCs with an extra C, which broker the relationship directly between the professors and the global student market in a structure that's analogous to work platforms like Amazon's Mechanical Turk, that brokers the relationship between workers seeking work and firms seeking services. There are long-standing ed tech firms that have been working traditionally with traditional universities and colleges, providing them software and platforms. They are continuing to do that while they are now offering their own courses and certificates. And there are new ed tech firms, and there are big tech firms. So for example, Google right now offers courses at $49 a piece, and students can earn a certificate in 3 to 6 months as a substitute for a 4-year college degree, and students earning these certificates are eligible to apply for jobs at Google. So the landscape of education is changing very rapidly, and change is slowest right now in traditional colleges and universities, which are constrained by a curricular structure that in turn is related to the revenue model. And so in traditional colleges and universities, such as my own, CBET exists on a piecemeal basis. It's experimental. The ELOs are crafted within individual departments without any oversight from any administrative office yet. So I don't know when that might happen, but it's something that I expect. And departments use student performance on ELOs as a means to assess the effectiveness of teaching as well as the effectiveness of overall programs. And the reason why they do that is because it's mandated by the university, in turn mandated by the government. And so platforms in traditional colleges and universities enable the examination of student performance on ELOs through the datafication of their performance in a new industry, a whole new industry called learning analytics. And so students' data are scraped from learning platforms, from transcripts, from applications, even from the internet, notably social media. The idea, the purpose is to profile students. And so actually learning analytics is quite similar to predictive policing. And so the idea is to identify students who are problems, right? Who are problematic students based on their past record and behavior, right? And then once they're identified as problematic, then advising for those students is different. The curriculum that's laid out for those students is different, and so forth. And by the way, just as we are not asked for our consent when our data are scraped, neither are the students. And furthermore, they don't even know that this is happening. And by the way, neither do most faculty. So, one more point here is that there is now all sorts of, right now there's all sorts of new things coming out in learning analytics that require video record. Oops, sorry, I always talk with my hands. So, new kinds of things coming out in learning analytics that require video recording and for things that have nothing to do with what students are tasked with. So, for example, facial expressions, mouse movements in the search for patterns, right? Okay, and so learning analytics can be in-house or it can be outsourced to ed tech firms. And all this has created new jobs and careers in traditional universities and colleges, as well as whole new institutes to train and assist faculty with assessment. And here come the certificates. Everybody's doing certificates. And so the reason why is that it's a means to deal with the enrollment problem, in turn tied to the revenue problem. And so in the new millennium, traditional universities and colleges have been struggling in part because of declining investment of the government in public universities and colleges. And so the response on the part of the institutions is to increase tuition to cover costs, as well as, of course, other kinds of strategies like strongly encouraging faculty to get very large grants. So one problem then is the nature of the non-traditional student market in the new millennium, which is diverse, it's older, they're often parents, and they're underemployed, meaning that they're poor, they don't have very much money. By 2013, fully 1/3 of the student population could not afford traditional colleges and universities. And meanwhile, these institutions continue to increase tuition in order to cover their costs. And in addition to not having very much money, this non-traditional student population they don't have time in the context of multiple jobs and responsibilities. And so most non-traditional students take courses online. Traditional universities and colleges, therefore, must compete with ed tech firms, big tech firms, non-traditional universities, and the market is crowded. And the terms have been set by the for-profit private sector, which effectively has capitalized on the widespread precariousness of life produced in the last quarter of the 20th century by the decline of Fordism and the development of corporate strategies such as outsourcing that delivers lower wages and unstable jobs without benefits. Outsourcing as a corporate strategy, of course, persists in the new millennium, but in the new millennium, the problems of outsourcing then are compounded by crowdsourcing, right? And so in crowdsourcing, jobs are divided up into numerous tasks, each of which pay, on average, very, very little, sometimes nothing at all. And so work is even more unstable, wages are even lower, and not only do crowd workers not receive benefits, they don't even have basic employee rights because they're cast as independent contractors. So there are a number of digital era educational strategies in light of these kinds of circumstances and the nature of the new non-traditional student market. And so early on in the new millennium, the idea was, okay, eliminate fixed space for learning because, so people can tune in say, distance learning, an early strategy. They can tune in to a class from work or from home, and so it's a fixed time but not a fixed space. Another strategy is blended learning, which is a combination of asynchronous and synchronous teaching. In non-traditional institutions, the synchronous part is often compressed into a boot camp type approach in order, in recognition that that many students just, lack time. Also, especially in non-traditional institutions, the setup costs for the synchronous part is high, and so in order to cut costs, what people have done has been to divide up the teaching role into numerous tasks for different people, of course in non-tenure track positions with relatively low pay. And so teachers now are guides on the side, and so there's people who are guides on the side, there's people who do assessment, there's other people who do course design, and so forth. I think a reflection of the casualization of academic labor. Another strategy then is, in addition to eliminating the fixed space for learning, also eliminate the fixed time for learning and so there is the move then to thoroughly online courses. And although there's AI tutors already, the vision for the future is for these online courses to work through AI tutors, which to my way of thinking is a problem. If I had a tutor, I would want that tutor to be able to understand and explain. We currently are situated in the second wave of AI, which has the capacity for description and prediction, but does not have the capacity for understanding or explanation. Another part of this vision for the future for these online courses is the use of blockchain, which of course is being used right now in limited ways, but the idea is to use blockchain for a global educational ecosystem. And the idea is to enable a growing global non-traditional student population to enroll in courses in institutions around the world. And so blockchain would be in use to document and transfer course certificate ELO credits. Meanwhile, university employees would facilitate customizing interinstitutional international curricula, and professors would host online discussions. And when that happens, I think that would be the maturation of the casualization of academic labor. And of course, the broad strategy underlying these thoroughly online courses is this new industry of learning analytics that datafies student knowledges. Well, I want to turn now to talk about some downstream consequences of this whole approach to education in work practices. And I'm going to focus on the data sciences because the data sciences represent a strategic industry that ripples throughout society. So the data sciences are pervasive in all sectors of the economy: agriculture, manufacturing, consumer services, advanced corporate services, health services, IT, and of course, government and the military. And so the point about the data sciences is that everybody is affected, whether or not they realize that they are. And my main point here is that jobs in the data sciences, in those jobs, there are no requirements for contextual or conceptual knowledges outside statistics, engineering, and so forth. So, for example, consider a firm that is working on smart city projects, right? And so who is that firm going to hire? Well, the literature and critical data studies tells us which laments the diversity crisis, tells us that the people who work in these firms typically are white heterosexual men with very sheltered lived experience. And so so consider somebody in one of these firms. One day, that person might be tasked with constructing an algorithm to increase efficiency downtown in a parking system or transportation system. And then another day, that person's tasked with constructing an algorithm that is pertaining to surveillance. And of course, that algorithm and that surveillance system would be targeted not to the downtown, but very likely to a poor community of color. Well, without contextual or conceptual knowledges, the person who's tasked with constructing these algorithms has no idea about the uneven development across the metropolitan area and the history of it, the entrenched exclusions and so forth, and does not even ask the question, why am I constructing algorithms of opportunity for one place and algorithms with punitive significance for another place? And without the conceptual knowledges, that person is just going to be constructing algorithms and not asking the question about the relationship between the task at hand and general societal problems. So, for example, interviews with algorithmic experts in YouTube industries showed that these experts routinely avoided issues of inequalities embedded in platforms, precisely what Safiya Noble's book is about. Another study that interviewed data science practitioners found that fairness, which is considered a proxy for ethics, itself, in my opinion, a problem, is something that people thought that is what you do on your own time. And a global survey of data scientists showed that only about 15% of data scientists worldwide even address fairness issues at all. One data scientist on Medium said, "I like to view myself as a problem solver where data is my language, data science is my toolkit, and business results are my guiding force." I find this statement so powerful because it reflects absolutely no concern for the effects of applications of data science skills. And that may well be because the locus of the data sciences is in the private sector, which in the United States funds civilian AI research and orchestrates civilian AI projects. The main priority in the private sector is profit as well as speed, which enables more profits. Interviews in a survey of data analysts in firms across wide-ranging industries showed that the salient motive for engaging ethics was self-promotion to establish trustworthiness in the reputation economy, itself a reflection of the commodification of ethics itself. If we think about data science activity across a value chain, various tasks within a firm, various tasks across an ecosystem of firms. The sense of responsibility is spread so thinly among actors across nodes in the value chain that what happens is everybody unloads the ethics problem or the ethics question, if they think about it at all, always down the line to somebody else, and so there's no accountability. One AI practitioner said, "We were a technology provider, so we didn't make those decisions. It's the same as someone who builds guns for a living. You provide the gun to the guy who shoots it and kills someone in the army, but you just did your job and you made the tool." And so, so the same, that this study more generally found just that AI practitioners had limited awareness of the broader system in which they work. So in conclusion then, I've argued that a lack of attention to contextual and conceptual knowledges renders actors ignorant of the effects of their actions. No one is responsibilized, and this perpetuates social injustices. And I've argued that that a particular pedagogy, CBIT, in the new millennium, figures prominently in the production of this problem. Now, in my written paper for the symposium, I had a section that I didn't include today for the sake of time, and that section historicized CBIT and explained the pedagogical present with reference to the latter half of the 20th century. And so just one point that I'd like to make right now is that in the 20th century, CBIT did not exist in traditional colleges and universities. It was mainly implemented in non-tenure track, non-traditional institutions for a much different, smaller, non-traditional student market. And so in traditional colleges and universities in the 20th century, you had notably in the arts and sciences, you had alternative pedagogies, right? And yet we still see these similar problems. And so the point that I would like to make is there's multiple routes to the production of this problem, I think. So in the new millennium, we see that there's a particular pedagogy that perhaps exacerbates existing problems. But so there's different routes and that operate in conjunction with one another, in combination. And so one point that's really important to note is that in the United States, traditional colleges and universities always, historically and through the present, have been constructed by and for privileged people. And so another major factor that's involved here is lack of diversity, right? And so lack of diversity operates with the pedagogy in the new millennium, compounding existing problems. One more point that I want to make is that the relation between upstream learning and downstream practices is one of conditioning, but it is not determinant. So first of all, of course there are alternative pedagogies, both digitalized and non-digitalized. And more generally, and not even considering the education sector, there's always the possibility that people can just think proactively and critically beyond the knowledges that have been given to them and what is expected of them. I think that it might be very difficult, right? In part because people are very busy, often with multiple jobs, but there is always that possibility. So I guess what I would like to say in closing is that I think it's very important to identify serious problems, and I've spent, and my presentation has really been about that part. But at the same time, I think it's also important to celebrate remarkable possibilities. And so one example of that interests me is community-based peer production, which is the digitalization of communitarian projects for the purpose of scaling communitarian values that prioritize the social over the technical and the economic. And yet, these projects do so not without serious problems. And so And so my final suggestion is that I think that there is room for cautious optimism. Thank you, and I look forward to your comments.